Good morning, everybody. I posted these notes up yesterday. Thought I'd talk about them for those of you who are learning at home. So I'm posting this video later, so it might be wise to watch this, and it'll go along with these notes nicely. So we took notes on heredity. If you haven't already done so, this should be your title in your notes, so you'll want to get this written down. And we talked about how heredity is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. So every trait that you have that sort of makes you how you look, your hair color, your eye color, your skin color, whether your ears are attached, whether you have freckles or not, the shape of your facial features, all of those traits that you have came from your mom and your dad. You got 50% of your DNA from mom and 50% of your DNA from your dad. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you look exactly 50% like mom and 50% like dad. It doesn't necessarily translate to your looks. Maybe you look a lot more like mom. Maybe you don't look like either parent. But still, the traits you got came from your parents. Sometimes you get something completely different than either of your parents. There's people who have red hair, for example, and neither mom or dad have red hair. So where did it come from? Well, it still came from mom and dad. Mom and dad can be carriers of traits. Everybody in their DNA, they have the trait that they have, their hair color, but they have information for plenty of other traits that are in their family history. And then you have a chance of passing that down to your kids. So everything you have, every trait you have that sort of makes you how you look came from mom and dad in your DNA from them. Now, we call those traits inherited traits. The traits that you actually get from your DNA that you came from your mom and dad are called inherited traits. And we're going to talk about two types of traits today. Inherited is the first one. Again, these are things like your eye color, your hair color, how tall you're going to be as an adult. Some of these traits don't finalize until you're grown up, until you're in your mid-20s. The shape of your nose, the shape of your chin, whether your eyes are squinty or not. All of these things are inherited traits. Now, there's another type of trait that also is important and that makes you who you are. And by the way, if you haven't written this in your notes, you should add a bullet point in your notes. You can pause the video or look up the slides, but get this written in your notes. So there's other traits that are also important to who you are, but that aren't in your DNA. Maybe you have a scar. I'd say that's a part of your family, your personal history. That's part of who you are, right? Maybe you dye your hair, or maybe you have piercings. Maybe you, when you get older, maybe you'll get a tattoo or something. I mean, that's going to be a part of who you are. But that is not something you're born with, and it's not something that you'll pass on to your kids. For example, if you have a scar, that doesn't mean that when you have a child, they're going to have that same scar, right? It doesn't make any sense because it's not in your DNA, so it doesn't get passed on to the child. So these traits that we're talking about are called acquired traits. Again, go ahead and write this in your notes if you haven't already done so. You can pause the video or look it up in the slides later. But acquired traits are things that are developed during life, but that aren't genetically passed on from parent to child. Scars, losing an arm or a leg or a finger in an accident. Being good at something like playing a sport or being a good singer, being a good artist. Having pierced ears, any of these things are acquired during your life. They're gained during your life or developed. But they're not going to be passed on in your DNA. Well, that leads us to an interesting question. Look at this. So let's talk about Tom here. Tom's parents are good at basketball. And you don't need to write this slide, by the way. Tom's parents are good at basketball. Now, he is also good at basketball, and so are all of his brothers and sisters. His whole family is good at basketball. So would you think that this is an example of an inherited trait, or would it be an acquired trait? What do you think? Why do you think that? Why would you choose that? You could pause the video here if you'd like and think it over for a minute. Why would you choose what you chose? Well, this is an example of an acquired trait. Well, why? Everyone in his family has this trait. How is that not inherited? How is that not in the DNA? Well, Probably the reason they're all good, as you might assume, is because mom and dad value it, right? They find it important. So they probably play with their kids. They probably practice with their kids. They have them take lessons and play on teams. If mom and dad value it, it's likely that the kids will value it, although they don't have to. So the next question becomes, what if I also told you that everybody in Tom's family is 6 feet tall or taller? Now, is being 6 feet tall, is that an inherited trait or an acquired trait? That is inherited. Would them being tall maybe give them an advantage and help them to be better at basketball when they play against other people? Sure. They still need to practice. They still need to develop that skill. Just because they're tall wouldn't mean that they automatically are good basketball players, but it certainly could help. And so I want you to understand that your inherited traits can affect your acquired traits for sure. But this is still acquired. You have to still develop that skill by practicing it during your life. Well, if we look at the skin color, the eye shape of this lizard, would you say that's inherited or acquired? Think about it. This, of course, is an example of an inherited trait. It's in the DNA. It gets passed on from parent to child. They don't have any control over it. The white fur of a polar bear. Well, that's inherited too, right? That's in the DNA. Now, what if I told you that off to the side here, what you can't see is that these bears are watching a big screen television and they're loving to watch football. They really love watching football. Well, having an interest in football or television, well, that's acquired. That's something we learn in our lifetime. This is an interesting one. Here's a bear, and they'll sit up on top of these little waterfalls, and they'll catch fish as the fish are jumping up. Inherited or acquired, that skill. This one's a little tricky, right? Because they certainly learn this in most cases from mama bear. Mama bear will sort of demonstrate how to do it. So that would be acquired, right? It's a learned thing. But, there's a degree of instinct here probably too. An instinct, we don't fully understand instinct and how animals sort of have these innate knowledge of doing certain things. So there might be some inherited aspect there as well. Being a good artist. Got to practice, right? So that's going to be acquired. Again, there could be inherited traits, though. Maybe this person, they have genetically, their brain just really interprets visual data very well. They're really good at seeing something and seeing the lines that make it up and then reproducing that. So there could certainly be genetic inherited traits that help with that, but still got to develop the skill that's acquired. Having dyed hair, you acquire that. Your natural hair color is inherited. This is a fun one. Look at that. Being tall or short, that's inherited. Being good at basketball, acquired. Little guy can still develop that skill. Playing piano, again, acquired. And having pierced ears, that's an acquired trait. So we'll stop there, but that's the difference between inherited and acquired traits. Now, if you haven't already done so, I'm going to put another video up of instructions on that interview assignment where you'll be interviewing people and asking their inherited or acquired traits. So please, once you finish this and get your notes down, watch the other one and finish that assignment.